Hi! This time I'm going to talk about some setting ideas that I had for the So You Want to Be a Badass tabletop role playing game. If you do not know about that game, I recommend that you check out the link that I'm going to put in the description below. It's going to take you to my review of the core rulebook of So You Want to Be a Badass. I did that review about a year ago, but there's a game master guide for that tabletop role playing game coming out soon. I do not know exactly when, but I received the almost ready PDF or soon to be released document. It just needs a bit of polish in some areas. So I will be producing a video telling you about that game master guide. Now, when it comes to this specific video of setting ideas for that role playing game, I think that you can also use these settings for other more universal role playing game systems. So if you are playing Savage Worlds or GURPS, mm, maybe those anime style games like OVA or OVA or um, Valor, games like that, you can use these setting ideas and adapt them, sorry, to those games. Mm, okay. For those of you that do not know anything about So You Want to Be a Badass, to give you a small summary, it's basically a role playing game that rewards you for being a badass, not only in your special attacks and in your attitude, but also, for example, in the things that you say. There is a very structured, very significant social combat system that you can use even in the middle of combat. That is, your words could cause your opponent to break down, to suffer a sort of meltdown, and your opponent could be so affected by what you are telling him or her that the opponent could basically abandon the battlefield. So it's another tactical consideration during the combat rounds. So with these setting ideas, I'm going to tell you how to use your So You Want to Be a Badass core rulebook and adapt that system to different themes. The first thing that came to my mind, and I also talked a bit about it in the video review, is a setting focused on the mythos, on all of the Cthulhu mythos, weird horror, because I immediately imagined some characters speaking about disturbing, mind breaking things that cause the opponent rather than to just feel like put down or negatively affected by what he or she is hearing. He's basically trying to understand things that man was not meant to know about, and that's causing the opponent to suffer a sort of mind break, or the sanity is going down. So there's a chance that the opponent ends up insane. So that's a good variation of the core system where you are basically intimidating or negatively affecting the mind of your opponent. In this case, you are literally breaking his mind with all of those Lovecraftian disturbing secrets. So, in case you want to use this setting, I actually gave it the title of So You Want to Be a Mythos Badass. The basic premise is that the player characters are sorcerers or occultists that use the powers of the different mythos deities or gods. That doesn't mean that you have to play as a cultist. You could also play it like that. In fact, there is a really awesome Spanish role playing game. Maybe one of these days I'll get to review it, where you play as cultists of the great old ones. Mm. But in this case, you could be just like a sorcerer that knows the formulae to tap into the powers of Cthulhu, of Yig, of Nyarlathotep, all of those. And so here I'm going to tell you some ways in which you can modify your So You Want to Be a Badass role playing game for this setting. Mm, like I mentioned, during social combat, and remember, in So You Want to Be a Badass, you can engage the opponent in social combat while fighting against that opponent with melee weapons, ranged weapons, spells. It's another weapon, another tool in your arsenal against your opponent. You could start saying very disturbing things to your opponent. And I think that all of these three settings that I'm going to tell you about, they are a bit more on the over the top anime comedic side of things. Mm, you could play it a bit more seriously, but because So You Want to Be a Badass is a sort of action comedy sort of experience, in my opinion, I think it's better to keep things somewhat comedic. Mm. So in this case, you could say some things like maybe you're fighting against your opponent and suddenly your blades clash cinematically, and you tell him humanity is just a joke created by the elder things, and maybe that reminds your opponent of the disturbing origins of humanity according to Lovecraft's mythos, and he starts to suffer that meltdown or breakdown. And if you keep saying very disturbing things to your opponent, and like I said, you could get as comedic as you want, maybe you say something like, the entire existence came to be because Azathoth sneezed and all of his snots and buggers started to take shape in the forms of planets and even living beings. And so those are very disturbing things, and your opponent could not handle the truth and may actually just go completely insane and perhaps just flee from the battlefield, trying to commit himself or herself to some insane asylum, or just going mad and running without aim or purpose. So that's a way in which you can modify the social combat aspect of So You Want to Be a Badass. Now, when it comes to outlooks, which are basically the character class, so to speak, in So You Want to Be a Badass, these are the classes for your characters. You can also modify them according to the god that is related to the powers that you are using. Because, for example, there is an outlook of the dancer. Maybe you follow, you use the power of Azathoth. That could be it. If you're playing as a cultist, maybe you are following Azathoth. If you're a sorcerer, you are tapping into Azathoth's energies. And because you have heard the pipings of the court of Azathoth, you're actually dancing to those sounds, those maddening, that maddening music. So you are a dancer of Azathoth. But what if you are a shifter? Another outlook. The shifter obviously shifts between forms, mechanically and thematically speaking. Maybe you belong to some sort of discipline that taps into the power of Nyarlathotep. Maybe you are one of the many masks of Nyarlathotep and you are not aware of it, or maybe you are. So that's another way in which you can modify the outlooks. And yeah, you can pretty much use this in many other tabletop role-playing games. Not only So You Want to Be a Badass, but this role-playing game is perfect for these settings that I am telling you about, that I came up with. You could also modify the objects that you find. So all of the different gear and weapons that you use or that you find, etc. They could be technology that appears in Lovecraft's stories. Maybe those camera-like weapons from the Great Race, of course. Or maybe you have those small objects that shoot like lightning discharges or attacks from Yugoth. So you could use all of those Lovecraftian objects, the Necronomicon, of course. Instead of gear, you would just need to change some aesthetic details, trappings, whenever you're using an object from the core rulebook of So You Want to Be a Badass. It's very simple. And you could also modify your attacks. And like I said, So You Want to Be a Badass, you have a very strong anime flavor in that RPG. Maybe you do an attack that is called Shub Nigorat's 1,000 hits from the 1,000 young. Or maybe it's something a bit more comedic, like Mother Hydra's spanking, or Cthulhu calls you at 3 a.m. and you just want to sleep. So you could play it like that. So yeah, that's a good way in which you can modify the core system, giving it a stronger mythos theme. Now, the other setting that I came up with, I decided to call it So You Want to Be a Badass Chef. Now, this is based somewhat on the Food Wars anime and manga. If you do not know about that anime or manga, I'm going to put a couple of links in the description to the openings, because someone that is not familiar with the plotline, the story, could think that it's actually like an anime of fighting chefs or cooks. But it's actually your typical Well, of course, it's going to have many anime tropes, but it's like those contests or shows where you have different chefs and cooks, and they are preparing different dishes, and so those dishes are judged by other more experienced cooks or food critics, and they decide if they win or lose depending on the flavor, the appearance of the dish, etc. So this is somewhat like that. Maybe the plot line is that you have this group of chefs that want to be the best chefs in the world, or that they are looking for the most secret and mysterious ingredient for their next food creation. You could handle it however you like. And just going back a bit to the mythos setting, sorry, maybe like I said, if you are cultists of the different great old ones, maybe it's a battle between cultists, or if you are sorcerers, you could be mm, taking on adventures like in Call of Cthulhu in the role playing game, but in this case, you are actually experienced sorcerers that know how to wield the power of the mythos. You can play it however you like. But in this case of badass chef, like I said, maybe you're a group of people that are looking for the ultimate ingredient, or perhaps a secret recipe to design a dish. However you want to play it in your adventures and campaign, there are many ways in which you can handle the situation to give it a more that combination of so you want to be a badass with food wars. Now, when it comes to social combat, you could be thinking, but how does that apply to social combat? Um, Food doesn't necessarily relate immediately with words. So I came up with an idea that, because it's somewhat of an over the top, perhaps even weird setting as well, maybe these chefs have some sort of supernatural power that allows them to prepare some food and put it in a sort of very small pocket dimension where the food is perfectly kept fresh, just like you if you have just finished cooking the dish. So maybe they have those different foods on the pocket dimensions, different dishes and desserts, all sorts of things. And when they attack the opponent with the social combat mechanic of the core rulebook, maybe their words open up these pocket dimensions and the food appears before their opponents, and they feel supernaturally forced to taste the dish. In the Food Wars anime, some food is just simply irresistible. The characters have to eat it because the smell is just so powerful, and they end up tasting the food, and in a somewhat comedic way, they end up losing their clothes. It's kind of like it's so delicious that they have this sort of like extreme pleasure, and their clothes just uh, rip out or start tearing apart. So maybe that's the way that you could replace the breakdown or make meltdown aesthetic of the system. Maybe your character isn't the opponent isn't breaking down or melting down. Maybe it's the flavor is so delicious that they start to lose their clothes and they cannot fight well because they need to cover their more vulnerable areas. And maybe when you inflict enough social damage, they flee from the fight because they are completely naked, or maybe they are just so hungry because they want more food. Maybe they run to look for the closest restaurant, or maybe they ate so much that they need to go to the bathroom. You can handle it as funny or as comedic as you want. Now, when it comes to modifying the the classes, you could perhaps have different chefs that specialize in different sorts of food, like spicy food. Maybe as a chef specializes in pizza, or for example, there is this outlook, the berserker outlook. Maybe you have a chef that specializes in cutting meat and preparing all sorts of meat dishes. So now you fight with cleavers. So these chefs actually fight, unlike the anime Food Wars. In this setting of so you want to be a badass, you would actually fight with different utensils and different tools of the trade for chefs. So that's another way in which you can modify, for example, the objects. Maybe you have, instead of pieces of gear and weapons, you have all sorts of forks and spoons and kitchen knives and pots and pans. So very comedic, very ridiculous perhaps. It fits the I think it achieves that combination, like I told you, of food wars with so you want to be a badass. And your special attacks, they could have the names of food in real life. I remember in Street Fighter the 4 when El Fuerte first appeared, you know, that Mexican wrestler that is also a chef, and being a Mexican myself, I found it really funny that he does those attacks that he says something like tostada press, or he says something like guacamole or something when he attacks. So maybe your attacks also have the names of different sorts of food. Mm, Maybe you paralyze your opponent with some sort of attack that you call the spaghetti entanglement or something. I think you could also, perhaps, when it comes to the outlooks or the character classes, maybe each character class is themed after a sort of national food. Maybe one cooks Mexican food, the other one Japanese food, French food, etc. Now to the next setting. This is called So You Want to Be a Badass Clown. I thought that social combat was perfect for some um, perhaps good or even terrible or lame jokes. That is, your opponent could be paralyzed because he laughs so much because of the jokes that you are saying or the funny things that you are saying. That reminds me a bit of a character in My Hero Academia. There is this superheroine that her special power is that she can make her opponents laugh. They cannot stop laughing. So I thought of a setting where the different outlooks are actually different types of clowns. Maybe you have a jester sort of character, another one is a mime, another one is a Pierrot sort of clown, all sorts of, maybe another one is a Harlequin. So those could be your outlooks. You could adapt those outlooks to different sorts of funny artists or comedic artists. So the social attack is going to be based on jokes, perhaps even memes or dank memes, and the opponent is either laughing when it's actually funny, or maybe the opponent is cringing, and that's what paralyzes the opponent. He's just cringing, or he cannot stop laughing. And when the social damage the social damage is just too much, maybe the opponent simply runs away before his sides explode because of all of the laughter. Mm. Or maybe he cannot tolerate the cringe and he just wants to get away to stop hearing those lame jokes. So that's how social combat would apply to this setting. Now, when it comes to objects, you could use clownish objects when it comes to gear and weapons and tools. Maybe you have things like a rubber chicken or a whoopee cushion, a jack in the box. But when it comes to modifying special attacks, maybe you can have some of the special attacks or abilities mentioned in the core rulebook reskinned or rethemed to fit the clown flavor. Like, for example, maybe you have something called the Ninja Mime's Silent but Deadly Attack. You know, from Mortal Kombat, Ninja Mime, silent but deadly. Or maybe you have something called Pagliacci's Last Song or Pagliacci's Tear, and it actually paralyzes the opponent for a moment with extreme sadness or confusion. Maybe you have some sort of attack that is called the Killer Clown Cut. So it's all about that. Or when it comes to Jack in the Box, maybe there is also a special attack in which your clown sort of character creates this sort of energy box that propels him or her forward while lunging or doing some sort of a special attack or hit or slash or whatever. So these are three setting ideas. There are many more ways in which you can change this so you want to be a badass tabletop role-playing game, or rather adapt it aesthetically to different settings. These three settings are quite comedic. I think they fit the mechanics and the loose flavor or loose theme of so you want to be a badass, because you do not have a specific setting. It's a role-playing game that you can adapt in so many ways to tell all kinds of stories. But certainly it's much better if you adapt them to how would you say, a mix of comedy and action, or action comedy. Well, thanks for watching this video, and like I said, you can adapt these settings to many other systems. I hope you found it entertaining, perhaps a bit silly. Um, if you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending Drive-Thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information how to do that will be in the description below. And stay tuned because perhaps in a week or two, I'm going to bring out a video telling you all about the Game Master Guide for So You Want to Be a Badass. Once again, thank you and see you later.